Welcome back to another episode of Living History. Last week, we spoke with anti-communist American President John F. Kennedy. This week, we have the opportunity to speak to the father of communism himself, Karl Marx, to learn about who he was and what he thinks of our modern world. Born in 1818 and died in 1883, Karl Marx was a German political theorist who, with his writing partner Friedrich Engels, wrote the Communist Manifesto, where he laid out the ideas and goals of communism. He argued that all history comes down to a class struggle, and that industrial societies consist of two groups, the workers, or the proletariat, and the employers, or the bourgeoisie. Marx argued that history consists of stages, starting with hunter-gathering societies and eventually reaching industrialized capitalism, at which point the proletariat will tire of their oppression and lead a revolt against the bourgeoisie to create a communist, stateless, moneyless, classless society, where workers are in charge and everyone owns everything in common. However, instead of workers being in charge, the history of communist countries is that of authoritarian dictators. Some argue this result is inevitable, as Marx's vision was utopian and not implementable in reality. They ask, in a world with no money, no government, no one in charge, who will take out the trash? If there's a surplus of people who want to be singers and a dearth of people who want to be doctors, who's going to make that decision? Nobody. Or a powerful leader who will rise up and fill that power vacuum. Therefore, the problem is with Marxism, the doctrine. But others respond that the dictators who have implemented Marxism really just seized power for themselves and didn't truly try to create a real Marxist society because that would be based on equality. They would respond to critics that even in our society today, some people volunteer to pick up trash or feed the needy in soup kitchens, and that a Marxist society can be achieved. Therefore, the problem is with the people who tried to implement Marxism, not the doctrine of Marxism itself. A Marxist named Vladimir Lenin seized power in the Russian Revolution of 1917, where he attempted to implement Marx's ideas, and he was succeeded by another Marxist named Joseph Stalin. The state they created was called the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union and the United States formed an alliance to defeat Adolf Hitler in World War II, but after the war, they turned on each other, largely motivated by their different economic systems and different conceptions of freedom. The Communist Soviet Union and the capitalist United States had a 50-year struggle for global dominance called the Cold War, where nuclear conflict was an ever-present looming threat. The closest we came to a nuclear face-off was during the Cuban Missile Crisis, during our very own John F. Kennedy's administration. Other leaders that use Marx's writing as the basis for their own governments include Kim Jong-un of North Korea, Fidel Castro of Cuba, and Mao Zedong of China. Scholars currently estimate the death toll from communist regimes in the 20th century to be between 60 and 100 million people, primarily in the USSR and China. Communism was never implemented while Karl Marx was alive, so he will likely defend his writing against what he would view as its misimplementation in countries like the Soviet Union and China. But as you'll notice now that you're about to meet him, Marx was a very aggressive, proud, gruff, and irritable man. He did not take well to disagreement and suffered from a painful skin disease for most of his life. Marx was often unemployed, did not seek a job, and lived off the generosity of his writing partner Friedrich Engels. Though he said he championed the rights of workers, paradoxically he hardly knew any, preferring to associate in revolutionary and academic circles where he is still the most well-known today, far more than among, say, blue-collar workers. The real few times that Marx did encounter workers, he was very rude to them, but in his defense, he was rude to pretty much everybody. He was one of the most influential men in history and will likely be quite an adversarial guest. Still, gotta hand it to him for coming on the show. Now, something to keep in mind about Marx is that he was also a poet, and some scholars argue that his economic vision was less based on thorough, scientifically based research, but rather arose from his artistic, poetic vision of the world. Marx's economic writing is more a criticism than it is a solution, or any economic system of its own. Almost all of his writing is the critique of existing systems, and when it came to exactly how a replacement communist utopia would work, well, he was sparse on details. Many of the things Marx says in this episode are direct quotes. Now, meet Karl Marx. Mr. Marx, thank you for joining us today.
Well, Casey, I'm always glad to further the cause of workers' rights wherever I can.
Of course. Now, Mr. Marx, a lot has been written about you since the time of your death, and in particular, I wanted to bring up two prominent notions about you and allow you to respond. Historians like Paul Johnson have written that you wrote a great deal of poetry, and it was your poetic vision that fueled your political vision. Your poems often deal with the end of the world and the devil. One of your favorite lines was Mephistopheles' "Everything that exists deserves to perish." The idea being you had these poetic ideas of the end of the world, and they became your economic writing, where you predict the end of capitalism and inevitable mass uprising. Secondly, a critique of your work is that you seemed ready to distort facts and even lie to advance ideas. One famous example is when the British Prime Minister William Gladstone celebrated the advances of living standards for the British worker. You were so worried this would mean people would not turn to your revolutionary ideas that you wrote that Gladstone actually said conditions for only the very wealthy had improved. And in the same vein, your predictions were virtually all proven wrong. You predicted capitalism was unsustainable and would lead to mass societal breakdown, starvation, and poverty, but since you wrote that, capitalist countries have become immeasurably wealthier.
What is this? Thou hast no more brain than I have in mine elbow! I will annihilate you!
Please, Mr. Marx, I'm giving you a chance to respond, but the truth is you encouraged mob violence, assassination, and, in an almost Hamiltonian sense, could not handle the smallest criticism, often responding with verses from your favorite Shakespeare play, the very violent Troilus and Cressida, as you are seeming to make evident right now.
You are such a dog. I was a man of morals. I saw the exploitation of workers around me by the greedy bourgeoisie and sought to make a better world. Are you a stooge for the bourgeoisie? What they do is criminal. You fail to point out that never has there been more inequality in these capitalist countries. Capitalist exploiters like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk have made billions while there are children starving in the streets. And this is the system you are defending? Why, sir, I challenge you to a duel.
Mr. Marx, all right. Okay, here's a question for you. Our patron Casey Cotreau asks, what are your thoughts on today's economy, and how does it compare to the economy in your time?
First, the duel.
I'm gonna have to pass on that.
Of course you will, thou damned cur. How does the economy compare? I will tell you. It has gotten worse because industrialization has advanced so far. Look around you and tell me the capitalist system is working. Workers are losing their jobs to animation, to AI. Your very own union, SAG-AFTRA, went on strike for this very reason. But perhaps more important than material concerns is the alienation workers face. Under communism, I can be a fisherman one day, a poet the next, a craftsman the next.
How would that work on a societal level?
There would be a decentralized society where workers would collaborate with each other and mutually decide for each according to his ability, to each according to his need. The workers will care for each other. Under capitalism, if all I do is make one part of one spot for one share, I will never get to revel in my creation. I will merely be a cog in the machine. I will not be a person, but a tool for profits. I never claimed capitalism to lead to the immediate impoverishment of every individual worker, of course. I said its inherent instability will lead to greater and greater crises, with the bourgeoisie exploiting the proletariat to make more profit and grow inequality until the workers foment a rebellion against their oppressors. And how exactly was I wrong? At all? Look around you, you fool!
What about the improvement of people's living standards under capitalism?
The only reason for the material improvement you speak of in the United States is through the capitalist exploitation of poor countries in the third world, where workers are literally throwing themselves off buildings from Dickensian working conditions, and children are treated like slaves. Not to mention, the capitalist countries have booms and bust cycles of economic crises. And who suffers? The workers! They don't know if they'll be able to keep their job. That is not what I would call sustainable. The need of a constantly expanding market chases the bourgeoisie over the entire surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere. Now that the whole world has practically been brought into your capitalist markets, what do you think happens next? But you, in America, even more than in my time, masterfully crafted the propaganda of the American dream. George Carlin, one of your comedians, or as I call him, philosopher, said it's called the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it. 3 families own more wealth than the bottom half of your country. Now go on. Defend your precious capitalism.
Wow. Clearly, you are very passionate.
Of course I am passionate! I am fighting for liberation! Communism came about through my rigorous, scientific study of history. The history of all hitherto society is the history of class struggles. I am trying to create a better world. What are you trying to do?
Of course, Mr. Marx. Your critics who believe your system couldn't work in reality would ask, how would your system deal with people who don't want to work? Or if, say, there's a need for more firefighters and not enough people want to be firefighters, how would that conflict be resolved? What happens when workers disagree?
These critics are too capitalist-minded to see beyond their own stupidity. These issues would be resolved communally and democratically, not forced on the proletariat from the top down. Once people are not forced to work to survive, there is a cooperative, community-oriented ethic. People will shift to work for the common good. If there is a need for firefighters, the people could democratically hold a meeting. And since everyone has equal material well-being, people would volunteer to meet a need in the community and to feel socially valued. Work is no longer needed for survival, so it won't be for survival, but for the common good.
And what about people who refuse to work?
This is primarily a cause of capitalism. The people are alienated from their labor and work from coercion and for survival. When everyone is taken care of and owns the means of production communally, they will not feel this alienation and can have more fulfilling lives. If someone still doesn't want to work in this society, it would likely be due to poor socialization. They would still be laboring under the false consciousness of capitalism. And the community should help adjust their thinking. And if there are some rare cases where people still don't want to work, maybe he has poor ability. And that's okay, because in a true communist society, each will care for one another, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need.
Okay. Now, I think many in our audience would be quick to point out that the implementation of your ideas has caused untold suffering, specifically the deaths of tens of millions of people by people like Joseph Stalin, Vladimir Lenin, and Mao Zedong.
Sir, if ignorance is bliss, then you must be the happiest man alive. You say that these deaths are because of my ideas? No! Those tyrants twisted my words for their own gain. They did not create true communism. My ideas are beautiful. My ideas are the inevitable conclusion of all history. The destiny of the world is to see my ideas realized. Vladimir Lenin? He was a wealthy member of the bourgeoisie himself. He seized power suddenly when I specifically wrote in my Communist Manifesto that I have not intent on replacing the existing social order at once. It proceeds gradually. And I said that the liberation of the proletariat must come about democratically. Stalin and Mao, they didn't care about workers either. They cared about power. And didn't understand anything about economics. Do you know one of the major components of Mao's economic agenda? Killing birds. He had everyone walk out in the streets with a shotgun and shoot birds because he was worried they were eating crops. Now, does this sound like a critical thinker to you? What happened next? Without sparrows to eat the locusts really did descend and eat the crops, and there was a mass famine. Say what you will about me, I never advocated the economic benefits to shooting birds. And a major point you seem to have conveniently missed is that all these killings were done with the state. I advocated a state-less society, free from the oppression that authoritarians can wreak in the name of any economic system. All these dictators created was a new form of oppression, where the Politburo took the place of the bourgeoisie. Furthermore, economics has stages. I always said that a country needs a certain economic development before communist revolution. A place like America is ripe for revolution. Agrarian early 20th century Russia was always doomed to fail. And I always advocated revolution led by the workers, not by the top down, by an elite clan of money grabbers.
Well, no one can indict you for want of spirit. Of course, I'll leave it to the viewers to evaluate your claims and your overall personality that some of them may be shocked by. But I think I know why you seem so irritable.
Oh, do you?
Mr. Marx, you drank, smoked, didn't exercise, rarely took baths, ate unhealthily, and had all parts of your body covered in painful boils, didn't you?
Yes, I did. And so unjust am I to be the recipient of this pain. I wrote, I hope the bourgeoisie will remember my carbuncles until their dying day. What swine they are.
You seem very resentful, Mr. Marx. One of your friends said, if your heart had matched your intellect, and you had possessed as much love as hate, I would have walked through fire for you. The acquisition of personal power is the aim of all his endeavors. And Marx does not believe in God, but believes much in himself. And I must say, I feel some of that description right now. It has also been pointed out that you were personally terrible at managing money and felt treated unfairly by moneylenders who are often Jews, and that this drove much of your economic writing against both capitalism and Jews. You would only contact your parents for money. Your mom even once wished that, quote, Karl would accumulate capital instead of just writing about it. And when your partner Engels lost his mistress, he was furious when you briefly acknowledged his loss and then asked for more money. And you complained about the supposed poor treatment of English workers, but, Mr. Marx, you yourself refused to pay your housekeeper any money.
My money struggles are proof that I, too, was a victim of capitalist oppression. And you misrepresent me, sir. The problems with the Jews was not their ethnicity, but their role in carrying out materialistic oppression through their usury. Every tyrant is backed by a Jew. Think about it. Are you Christian?
I'm afraid what you will say if I answer your question.
Oh, calm down. I ask to remind you of the fact that 2,000 years ago, Christ drove the Jewish money changers out of the temple, and that the tyrannical money changers of our age happen again chiefly to be Jews is more than mere coincidence, no?
Karl, you're gonna get us demonetized.
What?
Never mind. Now, Mr. Marx, I wanted to ask you, is it true that you believed that capitalism was in fact the most effective economic system ever devised in terms of material output?
Of commodities, yes! But the problem is it turns the worker into a commodity. The main difference between the proletarian and a slave is the slave is sold once. The proletarian has to sell himself by the day and by the hour. The proletarian is, so to speak, the slave of the entire bourgeois class. Now, Casey, listen And all of you capitalist sympathizing listeners, listen up. I understand that today you all view me as a radical, a failed idealist, perhaps worse. But the truth is you have already implemented many of my ideas, and you all seem to like the ones that you have. You have implemented my ideal of guaranteeing a basic level of subsistence for the proletariat through things like food stamps. You have implemented my recommendations for progressive taxation, for estate taxes, for expanding federal employment, and for state control of children's education starting as soon as they stop nursing.
Wow. I didn't know those ideas came from you. Didn't you go on to advocate for the abolishment of all religions, all countries, and the nuclear family to be superseded by communism?
No! Engels said I should take out the abolishing the family part in my final draft. You see, guess I sort of overplayed my hand with that one. The nuclear family gets in the way of communism. Children and parents would hold greater loyalty to their families and to the greater good of the world community of workers. Furthermore, the family oppresses women and keeps them in their domestic sphere, rather than contributing to the economic sphere of all workers. Children are to be raised collectively, not by their mother and their father.
And that's why I was one of the first to advocate for public schools.
But back to the point of what is so wrong with capitalism and why it is so exploitative.
I want your listeners to think about this. If I want to run a company and I have $1 billion, what can I do without labor?
Nothing!
Jeff Bezos only has Amazon because of the employees he has exploited to amass his great wealth. Capital is dead. Vampire-like, lives only by sucking living labor, and lives the more labor it sucks. I see. Is it true, Mr. Marx, that you called for the, quote, ruthless criticism of all that exists?
Yes, I did! I envisioned a society where people could live in harmony with one another. In order to reach that point, all forms of domination had to be overthrown.
Wow, okay. Well, I've got one more topic I wanted to ask you about before we finish.
Go ahead. You are a chattering jackdaw. Too proud for your own good.
Not sure what a jackdaw is, but okay. This will be one more harsh criticism.
A dog's tail is better than your tongue.
What I find fascinating is you are so revolutionary, such a resident of the world of ideas, that not only did you have very long stretches of unemployment where you did not care to get a job, but you went so far as to prevent your children from getting jobs or getting married. Earlier, we mentioned the housekeeper that you would never pay. Well, you conceived a child with her and said Engels was the father. When Engels, on his deathbed, told your daughter the truth, she was devastated. Then, after that daughter and your other living daughter killed themselves, your only surviving child was your son, whom you had with the housekeeper. You forbade him from coming to your house through the front door, and met him only once. And when you did, he didn't know you were his father. I think if that was the life I led, it might give me pause when telling the world how it should reorder its affairs.
I shall not even dignify your words with a response.
A rare moment of self-restraint from Karl Marx. Well, you have the floor, sir. Anything you want to say to our listeners? Now is your chance.
Well, firstly, I don't know why you all choose to listen to this poor, rude, craven swain. But that you are, I tell you this. You all think you are horrified at my intending to do away with private property. But in your existing society, private property is already done away for 9/10 of the population. What private property do you have? Compared to Bill Gates, compared to Elon Musk. They do nothing, yet they have all the wealth. They would have none without the labor of the proletariat. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communist revolution. Workers of the world, unite! You have a world to win, and you have nothing to lose but your chains!
All right. Thank you, Mr. Karl Marx. Karl Marx might be said to be a paradox. He fought for workers, but didn't like them. He fought for a utopian world while being irritable and malicious to the people around him. He wanted to build an equal society, but had a sense of superiority. He strove to lead revolutionary movements for a society with no leader. His writing style is even almost a paradox. Called dialectics, Marx would reconcile two opposing ideas to form a new one. Hopefully, hearing from him and about him today has allowed you to better understand the paradoxes that formed who Karl Marx was and what he stood for.
And you have nothing to lose but your chains!